The bells tolled across the valley, heavy and solemn, echoing over the darkened hills as though each chime sealed a vow I had never chosen for myself. The night air clung damp and chill, carrying with it the whispers of villagers who lingered beyond the castle gates, daring not to draw too near. Above the mist, Ravenshade rose like a phantom from stone, its towers clawing at the heavens, its battlements lost in drifting fog. It was not a home but a fortress, a place meant to keep secrets as much as to shelter those within. I stood at the altar inside the great hall, my gown a burden of white and silver, each stitch an emblem of my family's surrender. The embroidery caught the torchlight as though it mocked me, glimmering with wealth my father could never provide, wealth that now chained me to a man I hardly knew. My veil hid my trembling, but not the truth. I was afraid. The chamber was filled with nobility cloaked in velvet and jewels, yet none dared meet my eyes. They looked only at him, the men who waited at the altar. Leonhart Ravenshade. The Duke of Ravenshade. His name alone carried weight enough to silence an entire hall. He stood broad-shouldered and still, a figure hewn from darkness, his black velvet cloak draped across him like a shroud. The firelight kissed the edges of his face but revealed little, as though shadows were eager to claim him. The people whispered of curses in his blood, of sins that had soaked into his very veins from forefathers long gone. Some claimed he was touched by death, that the night itself bowed to him. None spoke such words where he might hear, for his presence alone demanded silence. When the priest intoned the vows, his voice trembled more than mine. My lips moved, uttering words my heart could not claim, and when the time came, the Duke lifted the veil. Gasps shivered through the hall, but not because of me. It was his eyes, grey as storm clouds, glinting with a restless violence restrained by will alone, that pierced mine. No kindness, no cruelty, only an unwavering search, as if he wished to strip the soul bare and see what lay hidden beneath. "You are mine now," he murmured, words meant for my ears alone. His breath stirred the fine lace at my cheek. The priest blessed us, the nobles applauded, but the sound was hollow, echoing strangely through the vast stone chamber. We were bound. My life was no longer mine. The feast began, loud and indulgent, yet no wine nor roasted meat could soften the dread that curled cold and persistent inside me. Nobles laughed, their jewels clattering as they raised goblets, but the Duke never smiled, not once. He sat at the head of the table, silent as a sentinel, eyes occasionally glancing my way, heavy with meaning I could not decipher. And though I ate nothing, though my throat burned dry with thirst, still I felt the weight of him, as if the air itself bent to his presence. At last, when the hour turned late and the hall grew drunk with merriment, he rose. The music faltered at once. He extended a hand, black-gloved, and the hall watched as I placed mine upon it. My pulse raced, though his touch was steady and cool. Without a word, he led me away, through arched doorways and long corridors where shadows stretched tall and threatening along the walls. The castle seemed endless, its silence punctured only by the echo of our footsteps. We stopped before a chamber door, heavy oak bound in iron. He unlocked it with a key that glinted sharp in the candlelight. Inside, the air was thick with the faint scent of cedar and something darker, something metallic, like iron long soaked in rain. He closed the door behind us with a sound like the toll of fate. I expected a husband's embrace, a kiss, a touch. Instead, he strode to the windows, yanked the curtains closed, and cast the room into half-light. Only a single candelabra burned, its flames wavering like frightened witnesses. He turned to me, his expression carved from restraint, as though he fought some unseen battle within himself. "You must never enter the west wing," he said, voice low but sharp, each word weighted as though it could not be undone. "And you must never ask me what I do when the moon is full." His warning fell heavy between us. My heart pounded against the confines of my chest. I gathered what courage I could. And if I disobey? He stepped closer, the shadows deepening around him until his features blurred into something almost otherworldly. His eyes caught the candlelight, glinting not gray now, but silver, an unnatural brightness that froze me in place. "Then," he said, his voice a promise forged from steel and sorrow, "you will know why the world fears my name." The silence that followed was unbearable. The candle hissed as wax dripped, and the night wind howled against the shuttered window, but neither sound masked the truth I felt in my bones. He was hiding something, something vast, something monstrous. And I, bound to him by vows unchosen, was now part of his secret. He turned from me, stripped his gloves, and set them upon the table with care. Then, without another word, he left me alone in the chamber. Alone on what should have been our wedding night. I sat upon the edge of the bed, the silken sheets cool against my hands, and stared at the door he had locked behind him. My body trembled with fear, but not fear alone. Beneath it, sharper and far more dangerous, something else had awakened in me, a pull toward the darkness he carried, a need to peel away the shadows and see the men beneath. That night, I did not sleep. I lay beneath the canopy, staring at the ceiling, listening for his footsteps in distant halls. I heard them once, faint and heavy, moving toward the forbidden wing. The sound faded, swallowed by silence, yet my thoughts did not still. I had become his bride, yet I was more prisoner than wife. My future was not a bed of roses but a labyrinth of locked doors and unanswered questions. And though he had left me untouched, though his hands had not claimed me as law allowed, something within me stirred. Curiosity, yes. Fear, beyond measure. But also something I dared not name, not yet. A dangerous longing, born from mystery, sharpened by the sound of his voice, by the storm of his eyes. The castle around me seemed to breathe, its ancient stones pressing close, whispering secrets too old for mortal ears. I knew then, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, that the vows I had spoken were not the end of my fate, but its beginning. The Duke had married me, not for love, not for alliance, but because of something he carried within him, something he could not risk being seen by the world. And though I told myself to fear him, though I told myself to endure in silence, the truth pulsed within me like a second heartbeat. I would not rest until I uncovered what he hid. Even if it cost me my freedom. Even if it cost me my soul. That was the night I became his bride. The night I learned I was bound not to a man, but to a secret that would devour me whole. And though the world beyond those castle walls still celebrated my wedding, I knew with each passing hour that I had stepped into a darkness no light could pierce. Yet somewhere within the silence, buried beneath dread, flickered a spark I could not deny. I wanted to know him. I wanted to understand the storm that lived behind those eyes. And with that desire, as dangerous as any blade, my fate was sealed.
Days bled into nights with a rhythm that felt rehearsed, as if the castle itself dictated the hours rather than the sun. I wandered its gardens where roses grew wild and tangled, their blooms thick with perfume but laced with thorns that caught at my sleeves as though warning me not to look too closely. The paths curved endlessly, and though they were meant to soothe, they only reminded me of my confinement. At meals I sat across from a duke at a table long enough for 20 souls, yet only we occupied it. Platters of meat, bread, and wine filled the silence, but his voice cut through it like a blade whenever he chose to speak. Always politics, always duties, always something that belonged to the realm, never to him. He did not ask about my thoughts, my dreams, or even my fears. He was a fortress of silence, and I, a prisoner expected to keep the gates shut. But each night, when the hall grew quiet and the candles died, I heard him. The slow, steady echo of his boots on the stone floors carried down the corridor outside my chamber. Always in the same direction. Always toward the west wing, the one place forbidden to me. I would hold my breath, listening to the sound until it faded into the distance, wondering what shadow swallowed him when he passed through those unseen doors. The servants knew. Their eyes betrayed them. When I asked, they crossed themselves quickly, as though the mere question might call misfortune upon their heads. One maid whispered that blood once stained the stones there, and could not be scrubbed away, no matter how many years passed. Another muttered of screams that drifted through the corridors on windless nights, the kind of sound that sank into bones and never left. They turned pale at my persistence, begging me not to speak of it again. But the more they avoided my eyes, the more the west wing called to me, like a voice slipping through the cracks of locked doors. The night came when I could bear it no longer. A storm gathered over the valley, clouds thick and black, winds lashing against the castle walls as though heaven itself tried to pry secrets from within. Thunder rolled like war drums, and lightning spilled through the arrow-slit windows, casting white scars across the stone. That was the night I chose. I carried a single candle, its small flame wavering in the drafts that chased me down the halls. The corridors stretched endlessly, each step heavier with dread and yet quickened by a hunger I could not still. At last I stood before the west wing's great door, taller than any I had ever seen, bound in iron that gleamed even in the dim light. My hand trembled as I pressed it to the wood, and the hinges groaned when I pushed, a sound like a creature waking after centuries of sleep. The air inside was different, colder, denser, filled with the weight of things unsaid. What I saw stole the breath from me. This was no ruin sealed off for decay, no forgotten part of the castle swallowed by dust. It was a sanctum, deliberate and terrible. Mirrors lined the walls but were veiled in black cloth as if their reflections might betray something unspeakable. Shelves sagged beneath books bound in cracked leather, titles scrawled in languages that slipped from my comprehension, words that seemed to writhe when I looked too long. Cages stood in the corners, their bars thick, chains dangling from within. They rattled faintly in the draught, though they held nothing. In the center of the chamber stood a chair, massive, restrained, its wooden arms scarred deep, as though clawed by hands not wholly human. Upon the table beside it lay an object that drew me forward against my will. An iron mask, dark and cold, carved with precision to fit a man's face. Its edges were lined with straps meant to bind it in place. I reached for it, my fingers grazing the metal. It was still warm, as if recently worn. A voice split the silence. "You should not be here." I spun around, the candle nearly falling from my hand. There he stood, Leonhard, the Duke of Ravenshade, his figure framed by the storm's light behind him. His hair clung damp against his face, his cloak heavy with rain. Yet it was not the storm that had unsettled him, but something far deeper. His eyes burned wild, and his chest rose and fell as though each breath was a battle he was losing. "I had to see," I whispered, the words tearing from me before I could contain them. My hand still hovered over the mask, as though it tethered me. "You said vows to me. Yet you lock your soul behind doors and shadows. What am I to you, if not worthy of the truth?" His stride was swift, his hand seizing the mask from beneath my fingers. He slammed it against the table, the sound clanging through the chamber like iron on iron. His face twisted, not with rage alone but with torment. "Some truths kill, Duchess. Do you wish to die tonight?" The storm howled, shaking the walls as if to echo his warning. But I stood my ground, candlelight trembling between us. "I wish to know you. All of you. Even the part the world fears." He froze at my words. For a moment, I thought the storm itself had ceased, for the silence was absolute. His gaze, storm-gray and unrelenting, locked onto mine with a force that felt like it might unravel me where I stood. "Do you wish to know what I am?" he asked again, his voice no longer a command but a plea, softer, breaking on the edges of his restraint. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst through my chest, yet still I nodded. "Yes." His shoulders sagged, as if the weight of centuries bore down upon him. He turned from me, his back rigid, his hands gripping the mask until his knuckles whitened. The storm's light flared, casting him in a silhouette that seemed less man than shadow. "Then wait," he said, his voice hollow as a grave. "Wait for the full moon." He walked past me then, the air shifting as he went, the storm spilling through the open door like a warning. I stood frozen, the candle flickering in my hand, staring at the chair with its scarred arms, at the cages, at the black-veiled mirrors. My mind spun with questions, each darker than the last. What curse demanded chains? What secret forced a man to wear iron upon his face? And yet beneath my terror, something stirred that I could neither deny nor quell. A terrible yearning, born not only of fear but of fascination. Whatever lived within him, whatever truth clawed at his soul, I would face it. I would know it. For in his torment, I had seen something more than shadows. I had seen the men. As the door slammed shut behind him, I realized I had stepped beyond the boundary of safety. My life was no longer my own. I was bound to his secret as surely as I was bound to him. And when the moon rose full, as he had promised, I would stand at the threshold of a revelation that could destroy me, or claim me forever.
The night of the full moon came wrapped in a silence so dense it pressed against the walls like a second skin. The valley lay shrouded in mist, the village beyond the gates dark and lifeless. Even the owls had fled the woods, leaving only the rasp of the wind clawing at the castle stones. Inside, the air was heavy with waiting. Doors were barred, shutters nailed fast, the chapel locked tight as though prayer itself might falter in the face of what was to come. The servants vanished into their chambers long before nightfall, their whispers cut short whenever my shadow crossed their path. Only I remained awake, pacing my chamber, the candle in my hand trembling as much as my own resolve. At the stroke of midnight, the door opened without a knock. He entered alone, no cloak, no guards, no armor of authority. Only the man himself, though even then I sensed he was not wholly mine. His eyes burned fever bright, his breath came ragged, and the sinews of his neck strained as if every breath was war. "Do not follow me tonight," he said, his voice hoarse, scraped raw. His hand braced against the frame as though his strength faltered. "What you see cannot be unseen." I wanted to answer, but words abandoned me. My silence must have spoken louder than any vow, for he turned without another warning and strode into the corridor. And though fear screamed within me, I followed. The west wing pulsed with firelight when we entered. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting long shadows that writhed across the walls. The air smelled of smoke and something coppery, something like blood. Chains hung heavy from the beams overhead, some bolted to the floor, some wound thick as serpents around iron rings. The Duke moved to the center of the chamber where a chair stood, its arms gouged with deep scars. His hands shook as he tore away his coat, his shirt, until only flesh and scar remained, skin mapped by wounds that told of battles no human could endure. I held my breath as his chest rose and fell, each movement sharper, more desperate. His eyes darted to the torches, the chains, the floor, anywhere but me. And then it began. His spine arched with a crack like breaking branches. His breath ripped free in guttural growls that no man should make. Muscles twisted beneath his skin, swelling, contorting. The veins in his arms blackened, pulsing with shadow that seemed alive, hungry. His fingers curled into claws, nails lengthening, tearing against his palms until blood dripped dark upon the stone. I stumbled back, my candle extinguished by the storm of air that whipped through the room. The fire from the torches flared higher as though feeding upon his agony. His face twisted, the sharp planes of nobility warping into something savage. Bones shifted, his jaw elongated, his teeth bared into fangs that glistened with the threat of ruin. His eyes, oh, his eyes, burned silver now, not the gray I had known, but molten, wild, unearthly. His roar split the chamber, a sound so thunderous it rattled the stones and sent the chains rattling in answer. It was the sound of torment, of power, of something that no priest would bless and no kingdom would claim. Half man, half beast, he stood before me, tethered by will alone to what little humanity remained. His chest heaved, the shadows writhing across his skin, and for one terrible moment I believed he would tear me apart where I stood. But then his eyes found mine through the monstrous veil. And I saw not hunger. I saw anguish. "You see now," he rasped, his voice fractured between man and creature, each word a jagged stone forced from his throat. "This is the secret the world must never know." My knees weakened beneath me, yet I did not flee. My heart hammered against my ribs, begging me to scream, to run, to hide, but something stronger anchored me. I looked at him and did not see the beast the whispers foretold. I saw a man broken by fate, chained to torment he had never chosen, still fighting, fighting not to become what darkness demanded. I stepped forward. Each chain rattle, each guttural growl warned me back, but I did not yield. The torchlight burned against his contorted form, teeth gleaming, claws flexing, yet my voice did not tremble when I spoke. "You are not the beast they fear," I whispered, my words barely audible above his ragged breath. "You are still my husband." For a heartbeat, the storm inside him faltered. The roaring ceased, the chains stilled. His monstrous chest rose once more, slower, steadier, as if my words had found him in the abyss and pulled him back. His gaze softened, the molten silver dimming just enough for me to glimpse the man I knew. His hand, clawed, trembling, scarred, lifted from his side. It reached toward me with agonizing slowness, every muscle straining against some inner war. I did not retreat. My own hand, pale and fragile, extended in answer. When his claws brushed my skin, I felt no pain, only heat, a violent pulse that shuddered through me as though his curse leapt from him to me. In that touch, I understood. He had not hidden this from me to protect himself, but to protect me from the burden of it. The mask, the chains, the silence at every meal, the warnings whispered in corridors, they were not the actions of a man guarding his pride, but of one shielding the only thing left untainted by his fate, me. The touch broke too soon. His body convulsed, another growl tearing from his throat, this one wilder, more dangerous. He staggered back, slamming the clawed hand against the iron chair as if chaining himself by will alone. The torches flared again, shadows writhing in protest. "Go," he snarled, his voice fractured, unrecognizable. "Go before I lose what remains." But I did not move. My tears spilled freely, my chest ached with a love that burned hotter than fear. "I will not leave you," I swore, the words spilling from me like blood from a wound. He roared again, the sound shaking the chamber, yet even in that fury he turned his face away from me, clawed hands seizing the chains and binding them around his wrists with a strength born of desperation. He locked himself down, trapping the beast, imprisoning it within walls that could hardly hold him. I stood rooted in the flickering torchlight, watching as the man I had married disappeared beneath the monstrous form, and yet, I no longer saw a monster. I saw a sacrifice. A soul who bore agony nightly so that the world could sleep, who bound himself in chains so others might never know what it cost him. The storm outside lashed harder, the windows rattling with its fury, but inside my heart had gone still. Whatever he was, whatever curse had claimed him, I knew with unshakable certainty that I belonged to him. Not to the beast, not to the curse, but to the men who fought against them, who still sought to be more than what fate decreed. And in that vow, silent but unbreakable, I sealed my fate. I would not turn away. I would walk into the abyss with him, even if it swallowed us both. For love, once woken, fears no darkness, no chains, no curse. And that night, in the chamber of torches and chains, I learned that my love for the Duke of Ravenshade was strong enough to defy the beast itself.